The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched for miles in every direction, its crystalline walls catching the light of 3 distant suns and scattering rainbows across the assembled delegates of 47 spacefaring civilizations. High Arbiter Zethval stood at the central podium, his insectoid body towering over most other species in the chamber, and his 4 compound eyes swept across the gathered representatives with cold satisfaction. Today would mark another easy conquest for the Galactic Council, another primitive world brought under their control, another species added to the long list of those who had learned their place in the universe. The humans of Earth had been watched for nearly 100 of their years, and the Council had seen everything they needed to see. They had observed the humans fighting among themselves over resources and beliefs, killing each other with weapons that seemed almost childish compared to Council technology, and broadcasting their entertainment and fears into space for anyone to intercept. The Council knew about human wars and human hatred and human weakness, and they had decided that Earth was ripe for incorporation into the Dominion. Zethval raised one of his 4 arms, and the chamber fell silent immediately. We gathered today to formalize the incorporation of the 3rd planet of the Sol System into Galactic Dominion territory, he announced. His voice translated instantly into hundreds of languages through the neural implants every delegate wore. The native species, calling themselves humanity, has reached the threshold of interstellar travel and must now be brought under proper governance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly, and several delegates made gestures of approval according to their species' customs. The Voss Collective, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells, pulsed with blue light to show their support. The Thren Confederacy, massive rock-like creatures who moved slowly but thought deeply, rumbled their assent. Only a few delegates remained silent, watching the proceedings with expressions that might have been curiosity or concern. In the center of the chamber, standing on a platform barely large enough for her feet, Ambassador Elena Vasquez represented all 8 billion humans on Earth. She was a small woman by human standards, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that had seen too much in her 60 years of life. She had been a soldier before she became a diplomat, and she had learned long ago that showing fear only invited attack around her. Beings of every shape and size looked down with expressions ranging from pity to contempt to hungry anticipation. Zethval turned his attention to her, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his alien features. The terms of incorporation are simple, he continued, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. Earth will surrender all governmental authority to Council administrators. Human military forces will be disbanded immediately, and your species will provide labor and resources as directed by your new supervisors. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the chamber. You have one of your planetary rotations to accept these terms, and resistance will result in orbital bombardment of your population centers until compliance is achieved. The threat hung in the air like poison, and several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Orbital bombardment was not used lightly, but it was also not uncommon, and every species in the chamber knew what it meant. Cities reduced to glass craters, millions of lives ended in seconds, and entire civilizations broken by the demonstration of overwhelming force. Ambassador Vasquez listened to the translation of these words without any visible reaction. Her face as calm as stone, her hands folded quietly in front of her. The delegates watched her with growing interest, waiting for the tears or the pleas or the desperate bargaining that usually came at this moment. Instead, she spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber, steady and unhurried. May I ask a question, High Arbiter? Zethval made a gesture that indicated permission, clearly expecting some futile attempt to negotiate better terms. How many species have you incorporated in this manner? The question seemed to surprise him, and he conferred briefly with his advisors before responding. 342 species have been brought into the Dominion over the past 12,000 cycles, and all have learned to accept their proper place in the galactic order. Vasquez nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she had already suspected. And how many of those species fought back? A ripple of uncomfortable silence spread through the chamber, and Zethval's compound eyes narrowed with what might have been irritation. All species resist initially, he said dismissively. But all species eventually submit when they understand the futility of opposition. I see, Vasquez said. And then she smiled. It was not a warm smile or a friendly smile or even a nervous smile. And several delegates who had studied human expressions felt a sudden chill run through their bodies. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. The smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment. The smile that humans wore when they were about to do something unexpected. Then I will give you our answer in exactly one rotation, she said calmly. Zethval waved one hand dismissively, already turning his attention to other matters. Your answer is irrelevant. Human, because the outcome has already been decided, and your only choice is between submission and destruction. Perhaps, Vasquez replied, still wearing that unsettling smile. But I think you will find that humans have a way of creating new choices where none existed before. She turned and walked calmly toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence of the chamber. Several delegates exchanged glances of confusion, uncertain what to make of this strange response. The Keth representative, a being similar to Zethval but smaller and more aggressive, leaned toward his superior and spoke in their clicking native language. She does not seem afraid. I arbiter. Zethval made a dismissive gesture with two of his arms. Fear often hides behind false courage. And she will learn the same lesson that all primitives learn eventually. But as Vasquez disappeared through the massive doors, some of the older delegates felt an unfamiliar sensation stirring in their minds. They had seen many species face the Council's ultimatum over the millennia, and they had seen every possible reaction from weeping surrender to suicidal defiance. But they had never seen a species smile like that. Had never seen a representative walk away with such quiet confidence. Had never felt quite so uncertain about what would happen next. In her quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel, Ambassador Vasquez immediately opened a secure channel to Earth. The face of General Marcus Chen appeared on the screen, his expression tense with anticipation. They gave us the ultimatum, Vasquez reported, her professional calm finally cracking enough to show the fear and anger underneath. One rotation to surrender or they start bombardment. Chen nodded grimly. Having expected exactly this outcome, and Prometheus? Ready and waiting, Vasquez confirmed. Dr. Tanaka says all systems are green, and the fleet is in position. For a moment, both of them sat in silence, contemplating what was about to happen. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and the next 24 hours would determine whether humanity survived or perished. They have no idea what they have started, Chen said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of command. No, Vasquez agreed. They do not. And may God forgive us for what we are about to do. The channel closed, and Vasquez sat alone in the darkness of her quarters, thinking about the 342 species that had surrendered before. She wondered how many of them had possessed the knowledge and the will to fight back. And she wondered how many of them had simply never been given the chance. Humanity would not make the same mistake. They had been preparing for this moment for 15 years, building in secret and planning in shadow and waiting for the day when the universe would come knocking at their door. Now that day had arrived, and the Galactic Council was about to learn a lesson that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Earth was not going to surrender. Earth was going to fight, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The Keth expeditionary fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a swarm of angry insects. 200 warships arranged in perfect formation, each one bristling with weapons that could reduce cities to ash in seconds. Admiral Tethkon stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and surveyed the primitive star system with 4 eyes that held nothing but contempt. His intelligence officers had provided detailed reports on human military capabilities, and the findings had been almost amusing in their inadequacy. The humans possessed approximately 30 vessels capable of space combat, powered by crude fusion reactors and armed with weapons that the Keth had abandoned as obsolete centuries ago. Their planetary defenses consisted of a few orbital platforms and ground-based missile systems that would barely scratch the paint on a proper warship. This would not be a battle, Tethkan thought to himself. This would be a demonstration. He opened a channel to the human frequency bands and spoke in the harsh, clicking language of his people. Knowing the translation would reach Earth within minutes, people of Earth, I am Admiral Tethkan of the Keth hegemony, and I speak with the full authority of the Galactic Council. He paused for effect, enjoying the moment. You have refused the generous terms offered by the Council, and now you will learn the cost of defiance. So watch your skies and witness the power you have foolishly chosen to oppose. With a gesture, he ordered the first bombardment kinetic accelerators on 50 warships locked onto predetermined targets, carefully selected to maximize terror while preserving valuable resources. Sydney, Lagos, Rio de Janeiro. Cities chosen because they were large enough to make an impression, but not so critical that their loss would cripple the planet's eventual usefulness. The projectiles launched at incredible speed. Simple metal rods accelerated to a fraction of light speed, each one carrying more destructive energy than the primitive nuclear weapons humans had once feared. Admiral Tethkan watched the trajectory plots with satisfaction, counting down the seconds until impact on Earth. The warnings came too late. Air raid sirens screamed across 3 continents. But there was no time to evacuate, no time to seek shelter, no time to do anything but look up at the sky and pray to whatever gods humans believed in. The first rod struck Sydney Harbor at 3:47 a.m. local time, and the city that had stood for 2 centuries vanished in a flash of light and heat that could be seen from space. Lagos followed 17 seconds later. Then Rio de Janeiro. Then more cities as the bombardment continued with mechanical precision. Millions of people died in the span of minutes. Fathers and mothers and children who had done nothing wrong except live on a planet that the Galactic Council had decided to claim. The human fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Sarah Wong, attempted to intercept the Keth forces near Mars. Her 30 ships were the best that Earth had to offer, crewed by volunteers who knew they were flying to their deaths, armed with weapons that seemed like toys compared to what they faced. The battle lasted less than an hour. Keth energy weapons sliced through human hulls like hot knives through butter, and human missiles detonated harmlessly against shields that had been designed to withstand far greater threats. Vice Admiral Wong died on the bridge of her flagship. They used defiant, her last words a defiant curse transmitted on open channels for all to hear. By the time the sun rose over the burning ruins of Sydney, the human fleet had been reduced to scattered debris drifting in the void between planets on Earth. Panic spread like wildfire through populations that had never truly believed this day would come. Governments that had assured their citizens they were safe now scrambled to respond to an attack they had never imagined. And military commanders who had trained for terrestrial conflicts found themselves facing an enemy they could not reach or hurt or even understand in a bunker deep beneath the Swiss Alps. The United Nations Emergency Council gathered to face the impossible situation. Presidents and prime ministers and generals sat around a massive table, their faces pale with shock and grief and barely controlled terror on screens around the room. Images of destruction played on endless repeat. Cities reduced to glowing craters, coastlines reshaped by the force of impact. And death tolls that climbed higher with every passing minute. General Marcus Chun stood at the head of the table, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos around him, his face carved from stone. "We have lost approximately 12 million people in the initial bombardment," he reported, his voice steady despite the horror of his words. "Our space fleet has been destroyed. Our orbital defenses are overwhelmed. And the enemy fleet has taken position in lunar orbit." A murmur of despair rippled through the assembled leaders, and several of them put their heads in their hands. "Then it is over," said the president of the European Federation, his voice cracking with emotion. "We must surrender before they kill us all." Chung shook his head slowly, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "With respect, Mr. President, it is not over, and we will not surrender." Before anyone could respond, a door at the back of the room opened, and a small woman in a white lab coat entered. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was 63 years old, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen the birth of technologies most humans could not imagine. For 15 years, she had led the most secret project in human history, working in hidden facilities beneath deserts and oceans, preparing for the day that everyone hoped would never come. Now that day had arrived, and she was ready. "General Chun speaks the truth," she said, her voice calm and clear as she approached the table. "We are not defenseless, and we have not lost." The assembled leaders stared at her with confusion and desperate hope. "Who is this woman?" demanded the Chinese premier, "and what is she talking about?" Chun gestured for Tanaka to continue, and she activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room with images and data. 15 years ago, we recovered debris from a crashed alien probe in the Siberian wilderness, she explained. "We kept this discovery secret from the public, but we did not keep it secret from our scientists." The hologram showed schematics and blueprints, weapon systems and ship designs that looked nothing like anything humanity had ever built. We reverse-engineered their technology, improved upon it where we could, and built a fleet in secret, hidden in the asteroid belt and on the far side of the moon where no one would think to look. Gasps of amazement filled the room, and the despair on many faces began to transform into something else. "You are telling us that we have secret weapons?" asked the Indian Prime Minister. "I am telling you that we have been preparing for this exact scenario since before most of you took office," Tanaka replied. "The project is called Prometheus, and it includes 400 warships, weapon systems based on principles the Council abandoned as too dangerous, and artificial intelligences designed specifically for warfare." She turned to face the screens, showing the Keth fleet in lunar orbit, and her kind eyes hardened into something fierce. "They think they know us because they watched our television programs and intercepted our civilian communications." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "They have never seen what humans build when we are afraid, and they have never seen what we become when our children are murdered." General Chun stepped forward and addressed the room with the authority of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for war. "We have one chance to strike back, one chance to show the galaxy that humanity will not go quietly into the night." He looked at each leader in turn, his gaze demanding their courage and their trust. "The bombardment will continue unless we act, and more cities will burn, more millions will die. But if we execute Prometheus exactly as planned, we can turn this defeat into something the Galactic Council will never forget." Silence filled the bunker as the leaders of humanity considered their options. They could surrender and accept servitude, watching their species become slaves to alien masters who saw them as nothing more than useful animals, or they could fight, risking everything on a plan that had been developed in secret by people they had never known existed. The American president spoke first, her voice rough with grief and anger. "My daughter lived in Sydney. She stood and faced General Chum with tears streaming down her face. "Tell me how we hurt them." "General, tell me how we make them pay." One by one, the other leaders rose to their feet, united by loss and fury and the ancient human refusal to accept defeat. Dr. Tanaka smiled grimly and began to explain the plan that would either save humanity or destroy it completely outside the bunker. The sky burned with the light of falling stars, and the screams of the dying echoed across continents. But beneath the mountains of Switzerland, hope was being born from the ashes of despair. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what it truly meant to corner a species that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and every other catastrophe that the universe had thrown at them. The Keth thought they were dealing with primitives. They were about to discover how wrong they were. For 3 days, Earth went silent. Admiral Tethkan stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and stared at the blue and green planet below with growing confusion. His intelligence officers had predicted several possible responses to the bombardment, ranging from immediate surrender to desperate counterattacks to futile negotiations. None of them had predicted this absolute silence that seemed to swallow the entire planet. Human radio transmissions had ceased almost entirely, with only automated emergency broadcasts still cycling through the frequencies. The primitive satellites that humans used for communication and observation had powered down one by one, their systems going dark, as if someone had simply turned off a switch. Even the planetary defense platforms that had survived the initial attack now drifted cold and dead in orbit, their weapons unpowered and their crews apparently evacuated. "What are they doing?" muttered Commander Vethel, the admiral's second in command. "Are they surrendering without telling us?" Tethkan clicked his mandibles together in the Keth expression of uncertainty. In his long career, he had conquered 17 worlds for the hegemony, and he had seen species react to overwhelming force in many ways. He had seen them fight and die with honor, had seen them beg for mercy on their knees, had seen them attempt desperate last stands that ended in complete annihilation, but he had never seen a species simply stop, had never encountered this strange silence that seemed to mock him with its emptiness. "Send a message to their surface," he ordered. "Demand an immediate response from their leaders, and tell them that continued silence will be interpreted as resistance." The communication officer complied, broadcasting the demand on every frequency the humans were known to use. Minutes passed, then hours, and still no response came from the quiet world below. On the third day, Tethkan's patience finally reached its limit. "Prepare another bombardment," he commanded. "Target their largest remaining cities, and let them understand that silence will not protect them." But before the weapons could be activated, a single transmission finally emerged from Earth. Brief and cryptic. "The people of Earth request 48 additional hours to prepare a formal response to Council demands," the message said in a voice that sounded female and human. "We are organizing our surrender." Tethkan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Finally, the primitives were behaving as expected, their brief show of defiance crumbling in the face of obvious defeat. He granted the extension without hesitation, confident that the outcome was already determined. What he did not know, could not possibly know, was that those 3 days of silence had been the busiest in human history in the asteroid belt. 400 warships began their final preparations. They had been built in hollowed-out rocks over 15 years, assembled by automated systems and skeleton crews who had lived in secret among the tumbling debris of the solar system. Each ship was a masterpiece of improvised engineering, combining alien technology reverse-engineered from crashed probes with human innovations that would have seemed like magic to previous generations. The drives were based on quantum tunneling, principles that the Galactic Council had abandoned millennia ago. deemed too unstable and dangerous for practical use. Human engineers, working under the pressure of extinction, had found ways to make them work on the far side of Luna. Installations that had been disguised as abandoned mining facilities came alive for the first time. These facilities housed the artificial intelligences that Dr. Tanaka and her team had created. Digital minds designed specifically for warfare, capable of thinking faster and more ruthlessly than any organic being, unlike the Galactic Council, which had banned truly autonomous AI after a series of ancient disasters. Humanity had embraced the technology with desperate determination. If they were going to fight gods, they needed angels of their own across Earth itself. Hidden bunkers activated and secret installations powered up nuclear arsenals that the world had thought were meant for terrestrial conflicts revealed their true purpose. Thousands of warheads modified with miniaturized hyperspace drives that would allow them to bypass any shield the Council had ever invented. General Chun coordinated the operation from the Swiss bunker, sleeping in brief intervals and sustaining himself on coffee and determination. Every element of Prometheus had to be perfectly synchronized. Every ship and weapon and AI moving in precise coordination, because they would only get one chance to strike. A single mistake, a single element out of place, and the entire plan would collapse. Dr. Tanaka worked alongside her team in a facility beneath the Nevada desert, running final diagnostics on the AI systems that would serve as the electronic spearhead of the attack. She had given 15 years of her life to this project, and watched colleagues grow old and die while working on technologies that they could never tell their families about. Now the moment of truth had arrived, and she felt both terror and pride in equal measure. The AI clusters are performing at optimal levels, reported her lead assistant, a young man named David, who had been recruited straight out of university 10 years ago. Athena, Ares, and Apollo are all ready for deployment. Tanaka nodded and allowed herself a small smile. Those three names represented the culmination of human artificial intelligence research. Systems capable of infiltrating alien networks and turning enemy weapons against their masters. The Council had never encountered anything like them because no other species had ever been desperate enough to create such dangerous tools in the darkness of space. Hidden among the asteroids and debris of the outer system, the human fleet waited for the signal. Each ship was crewed by volunteers who understood that they might not survive the coming battle. Men and women who had left behind families and friends to serve in a war that most of humanity did not even know was being prepared. They had trained for years in simulators, had practiced maneuvers that seemed impossible by conventional standards, and had accepted that their lives belonged to something greater than themselves. Captain James Morrison commanded the lead vessel, a warship named Prometheus after the project that had created her. He was 43 years old, a former test pilot who had been recruited for the secret fleet 12 years ago. In all that time, he had never told his wife or children what he actually did, had watched them through video calls and pretended to be working on classified research. Now, as he prepared to lead humanity's counterattack, he thought about the family he might never see again and found that he was not afraid. He was angry, furiously and righteously angry, at the aliens who thought they could murder millions of his people and face no consequences. All ships report ready, his executive officer announced. We are awaiting the signal from Earth. Morrison nodded and gripped the arms of his command chair. Then we wait, he said quietly. And when the signal comes, we show these alien bastards what happens when you threaten our world, on Earth. The hours ticked by slowly as final preparations were completed. Ambassador Vasquez returned from Nexus Prime, her diplomatic vessel escorted by Keth warships that treated her like a prisoner being returned to her cell. She had played her role perfectly, showing just enough fear and submission to convince the Council that humanity was broken and defeated. Now she joined the other leaders in the Swiss bunker, watching screens that showed the deployment of human forces across the solar system. The Keth Admiral is expecting our formal surrender in 12 hours, she reported. He has already prepared a ceremony for the occasion, complete with cameras to broadcast our humiliation across the galaxy. General Chun allowed himself a grim smile. Then we should not disappoint him, he said. In 12 hours, we will give him a response that the galaxy will never forget. Dr. Tanaka activated the final sequence, uploading the AI systems to their deployment platforms and watching as green lights appeared across her control board one by one. Prometheus is ready, she announced. All systems are operational and awaiting your command. General Chun stood and faced the assembled leaders of humanity, his expression hard but his eyes bright with something that might have been hope. What we are about to do will change everything, he said. The galaxy will never see us the same way again, and we will never be able to go back to who we were before. He paused and looked at the screen showing Earth, beautiful and wounded and defiant. But our children will grow up free. Our people will never kneel to alien masters, and when historians look back at this moment, they will say that this was when humanity took its place among the stars. He turned to the communications officer. Send a signal. A single word went out across encrypted channels, reaching every hidden ship and secret installation and waiting weapon. Prometheus rising across the solar system. 400 warships ignited their drives and began their final approach. The silence was over. The counterattack had begun. The attack came from everywhere at once, and Admiral Tethkon had exactly 7 seconds to understand that everything he believed was wrong. The first warning came from the sensor officer, a young Keth whose voice cracked with disbelief as he reported contacts emerging from the asteroid belt. Admiral, I am detecting multiple hyperspace signatures, hundreds of them, and they are moving at speeds that should be impossible. Tethkan spun toward the tactical display and felt his 4 hearts stop beating simultaneously, where moments ago there had been nothing but empty space and tumbling rocks. Now there were ships, human ships, 400 of them screaming toward his fleet at velocities that defied everything the Keth knew about physics. That cannot be correct, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Their drives, the acceleration curves. Nothing in Council records suggests they have this capability, but the display did not lie, and the approaching fleet did not slow down. Captain James Morrison gripped his command chair as the Prometheus led the human fleet in its desperate charge. The quantum drives pushed the ship to speeds that would have torn any conventional vessel apart. But the human engineers had solved that problem through methods that the Council had dismissed as suicide. Inertial dampeners worked at maximum capacity, holding the crew in place while the universe blurred around them. All ships. This is Morrison, he announced over the fleet channel. Execute attack pattern Alpha. Target their command vessels first and make every shot count. The human fleet split into dozens of smaller formations, each one assigned to specific targets within the Keth Armada. Unlike the Council ships that relied on shields and armor to survive, the human vessels were built for speed and precision, designed to hit hard and fast before the enemy could respond. Admiral Tethkon shouted orders that his crew scrambled to obey, but confusion and disbelief slowed their response by precious seconds. By the time the Keth weapons came online, the humans were already among them. The first Keth destroyer exploded as a human ship passed through its shields at close range and unleashed a concentrated burst of plasma directly into its reactor core. The shields, designed to stop weapons fire from a distance, could not stop a vessel that simply ignored the conventional rules of engagement. More explosions. followed in rapid succession as the human fleet tore through the Keth formation like wolves among sheep. But the attack from the asteroid belt was only the first phase of Prometheus, even as the Keth struggled to respond to the physical assault. A second attack was already underway. Invisible and far more devastating, Dr. Tanaka watched from her bunker beneath Nevada as Athena, Ares, and Apollo went to work. The three AI systems had been transmitted to the battlefield via tight beam communications. Their digital consciousness, riding on beams of light that crossed the solar system in minutes, they infiltrated the Keth computer networks through communication channels that had been left open for coordination between ships, and they spread through the enemy systems like a virus through an unprotected body. Athena, named for the goddess of wisdom, analyzed the Keth defensive systems and identified their weaknesses in milliseconds. Ares, named for the god of war, took control of weapon systems on a dozen Keth vessels and turned them against their sister ships. Apollo, named for the god of light, blinded sensors and scrambled communications, leaving the Keth fleet fighting in darkness against an enemy they could neither see nor understand. Admiral Teth Khan watched in horror as his own ships began firing on each other, their weapon systems hijacked by invisible enemies that his engineers could not find or stop. "What is happening?" he screamed at his bridge crew. "How are they doing this?" No one could answer him because no one understood what was happening. The Galactic Council had banned truly autonomous AI thousands of years ago after a war that had nearly destroyed three civilizations. The idea that a primitive species like humanity would not only create such systems but deploy them in combat was beyond anything the Keth had imagined, and still the attack continued. The third phase beginning, even as the first two reached their peak on Earth. Nuclear silos that had been built during the Cold War and upgraded in secret opened their doors for the final time. Thousands of warheads rose into the sky on columns of fire, each one carrying a payload that had been modified with miniaturized hyperspace drives. The Council shields were designed to stop physical projectiles and energy weapons, but they had never been designed to stop weapons that simply appeared inside them. The warheads vanished as they reached orbit, jumping through microscopic tears in space-time that deposited them directly inside Keth vessels. The explosions that followed were small by nuclear standards, but they did not need to be large when they detonated inside engine rooms and ammunition magazines. Admiral Teth Khan felt the Eternal Dominion shudder as three warheads materialized within its hull and detonated. Simultaneously, alarms screamed throughout the ship as entire sections lost atmosphere, and damage reports flooded in from every department. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 15. The damage control officer reported, his voice trembling. "Engineering reports reactor containment failure in progress. We have maybe 10 minutes before core breach." Teth Khan looked at the tactical display and saw that his fleet was dying. Of the 200 ships he had brought to Earth, fewer than 60 remained operational, and those were being systematically destroyed by human vessels that moved like nothing he had ever seen. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Teth Khan understood that he was going to lose. He opened a channel to the Galactic Council, knowing that they were watching through quantum link cameras that had been installed specifically to record humanity's surrender. "High Arbiter," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "The humans have. They have technology we did not anticipate, weapons that bypass our shields, artificial intelligences that have taken control of our systems." He paused as another explosion rocked his dying flagship. "I am transmitting all available data before we are destroyed. But you must warn the Council. These humans are not what we believe them to be." His final word was a single Keth expression that translated roughly as "impossible" before the communication cut off, and the Eternal Dominion vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. Captain Morrison watched the enemy flagship die and allowed himself a moment of savage satisfaction before returning to the business of destroying what remained of the Keth fleet. The battle lasted another 3 hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. Human ships hunted down fleeing Keth vessels with relentless efficiency, the AI systems preventing any attempt at coordinated retreat or counterattack by the time the last enemy ship was destroyed. The Keth expeditionary fleet had been completely annihilated. 200 warships reduced to expanding clouds of debris. But the counterattack was not yet complete. Ambassador Vasquez had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it ever since she had returned from Nexus Prime. A human shuttle, escorted by a dozen warships, approached the captured remains of the Keth flagship that Morrison had disabled rather than destroyed. Aboard that vessel were the Admiral's personal logs, his communication equipment, and most importantly, the quantum link cameras that connected to the Galactic Council chamber. Vasquez boarded the crippled ship with a security team, stepping over the bodies of Keth crew, members who had died at their posts. She found the communication center intact and activated the quantum link with hands that did not tremble despite everything she had witnessed. The faces of 47 species appeared on the screen, staring at her with expressions that ranged from shock to terror to barely concealed panic. High Arbiter Zethval was notably absent, his seat occupied by a nervous assistant who seemed to want to be anywhere else in the galaxy. People of the Galactic Council, Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of 12 million dead and a species transformed by fire. You gave us one rotation to surrender, and this is our answer. She gestured, and the screens in the council chamber filled with images of the destroyed Keth fleet. Debris fields stretching across millions of kilometers. We know where your homeworlds are, she continued. We know your hyperspace routes and your supply lines and your military deployments. Her eyes hardened into something cold and dangerous. We have weapons that bypass your shields, artificial intelligences that can take control of your systems, and ships that can be anywhere in the galaxy within hours. She leaned forward, her face filling the screens of every delegate. Earth is not your colony. Earth is not your territory. Earth is off limits permanently. The chamber erupted in chaos, delegates shouting in their own languages, some calling for immediate retaliation, while others urged caution and negotiation. Vasquez waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. Any vessel that approaches our system without permission will be destroyed. Any attack on our world or our people will be answered with attacks on yours. She smiled, and it was the same smile she had worn when this all began. We did not want this war, but we will finish it if you force us to. So choose wisely. The quantum link went dark, and Vasquez slumped in her chair as the weight of everything that had happened finally caught up with her on Earth. Billions of people watched the broadcast and wept with relief and grief and something that might have been pride. In the weeks that followed the Battle of Earth, the Galactic Council experienced something it had not felt in 12,000 years of dominion over the stars. Fear real. Genuine, paralyzing fear of a species that most of them had, dismissed as primitive animals barely worthy of notice. Emergency sessions stretched for days as delegates argued and accused and demanded answers that no one could provide. How had the humans developed hyperspace technology that exceeded Council capabilities? How had they created artificial intelligences that could infiltrate and control Keth military systems? How had a species that had been building radio towers just a century ago somehow leapfrogged millennia of galactic development to become a threat to civilizations that had ruled the stars since before humans discovered fire? High Arbiter Zethval faced the Council for the last time, his 4 compound eyes dull with defeat and shame. I accept full responsibility for the failure of the Keth expeditionary fleet, he said. His voice hollow. Our intelligence assessments were catastrophically wrong, and our assumptions about human capabilities were based on wishful thinking rather than rigorous analysis. The Keth delegation sat in humiliated silence as their leader spoke words that no Keth had ever expected to say for the first time in their history. The hegemony had lost a battle, had been defeated by a species they considered inferior, had been forced to admit that their military might was not as absolute as they had always believed, but Zethval was not finished. The humans watched our broadcasts and our transmissions. For decades, he continued, they saw our technology and our weapons and our tactics displayed openly for anyone to study. His voice dropped to something like wonder, and they learned. They adapted, they improved upon everything they saw, and they did it in secret while we assumed they were too primitive to understand what they were seeing. He looked around the chamber at the faces of 47 species, all of them struggling to process this new reality. We made them afraid, and fear makes humans dangerous. The synthesis. Ancient artificial intelligences, who rarely spoke in council proceedings, broke their silence for the first time in millennia. We have analyzed to human artificial intelligence development, they announced through their crystalline speakers. Their approach differs fundamentally from all other species in our records. The council fell silent, knowing that the synthesis spoke only when they had information of critical importance. Most species develop AI along paths of cooperation and assistance, creating minds that complement organic intelligence. The lights within their crystalline shells flickered in patterns that suggested deep concern. Humans developed AI along paths specifically designed for warfare, creating minds that are aggressive, adaptive, and ruthless in ways that our own consciousness finds disturbing. A murmur of alarm rippled through the chamber. We recommend extreme caution in all future dealings with this species on Earth. The victory celebrations were tempered by grief for the millions who had died in the initial bombardment. Monuments rose in Sydney and Lagos and Rio de Janeiro. Eternal flames burning above mass graves where the remains of those who had perished could never be separated or identified. General Marcus Chen attended the dedication ceremony in Sydney, standing in his dress uniform before a crowd of survivors and mourners who had come from around the world. We did not ask for this war, he said, his voice carried by speakers across the ruined landscape. We did not seek to prove ourselves to the galaxy or to demonstrate our capabilities to beings who saw us as nothing more than useful animals. He paused and looked at the flame that burned above the memorial. But when they came for us, when they murdered our people and demanded our surrender, we found something inside ourselves that we had forgotten we possessed. His voice rose with emotion that he rarely allowed himself to show. We found the spirit that has carried humanity through ice ages and plagues, through wars and famines, through every catastrophe that the universe has thrown at us since we first climbed down from the trees. He turned to face the crowd. We found the refusal to surrender, the determination to survive, the absolute conviction that no matter how powerful our enemies might be, they would never break us. The crowd erupted in cheers and tears, a mixture of grief and pride that seemed to capture everything humanity was feeling in that moment. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood at the edge of the ceremony, watching the man who had commanded Earth's forces during its darkest hour. She had worked with Chun for 15 years, had argued with him and collaborated with him, and sometimes despaired of ever completing the project that had saved their species. Now, as she watched him inspire a wounded world, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since the project began. Hope. Not just hope for survival, which had always seemed uncertain, but hope for a future where humanity would take its place among the stars as equals rather than subjects. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to Nexus Prime 6 months after the battle. But this time, she traveled aboard a human warship rather than a diplomatic shuttle, the Prometheus, rebuilt and upgraded after the battle, carried her through the hyperspace lanes that the Council had once controlled absolutely. Captain Morrison insisted on commanding the mission personally, his crew eager to demonstrate that the victory over the Keth had been no fluke. The Council chamber felt different when Vasquez entered it again, where before the delegates had looked down on her with contempt and pity. Now they watched her with something that might have been respect, and might have been fear. She walked to the central platform and faced the assembly with the confidence of a woman who represented a species that had proved itself worthy. The Galactic Council offered Earth 2 choices, she began. Surrender or destruction. She smiled. And this time, it was not the unsettling smile of secrets kept, but the warm smile of someone who had finally found peace. We have chosen a third option. We have chosen to remain free. The chamber was silent as she continued. Earth does not seek conflict with the Council or any of its member species. We do not desire conquest or revenge or the expansion of territory at the expense of others. Her voice hardened slightly. But we will defend our world and our people against any threat. And we have demonstrated that we have the capability to do so. She looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. We come today to offer something different. We come to offer friendship and cooperation between equals. A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembly. Earth possesses technologies that could benefit all species in this galaxy, and we are willing to share them with any civilization that treats us with respect and dignity. She paused for effect. We also possess technologies that could pose a threat to any civilization that chooses to attack us. But we would rather use our knowledge to build than to destroy. The negotiations that followed lasted for months, with delegations from Earth traveling to dozens of worlds and representatives from many species visiting the petitions. Visiting the Mysians from Earth traveling to dozens of worlds and representatives from many species visiting the Sol system. Not everyone accepted humanity's offer of friendship, and the Keth in particular harbored deep resentment over their humiliating defeat. But most species recognized the wisdom of embracing a powerful new ally rather than creating a permanent enemy. The final agreement, signed on Nexus Prime exactly 1 year after the bombardment of Earth, granted humanity provisional membership in the Galactic Council. It was an unprecedented gesture, extended to no other species in the Council's long history. An acknowledgement that humans had earned their place among the stars through courage and innovation rather than mere survival. General Chun retired from military service shortly after the agreement was signed. Returning to a small farm in Montana, where he had grown up, he spent his remaining years teaching history to students who could barely comprehend a world where humans had not been a galactic power. Dr. Tanaka became Earth's first galactic science envoy, traveling to alien worlds and sharing human knowledge, while learning everything she could about the technologies of other species. Her work would lay the foundation for breakthroughs that would benefit humanity for generations. To come, Captain Morrison continued to command the Prometheus until his retirement, becoming a legend among the growing ranks of Earth's interstellar navy. He never spoke publicly about the battle that had saved humanity, but those who served under him knew that he carried the memory of that day with him, always. Ambassador Vasquez, eventually elected Secretary General of a transformed United Nations, dedicated herself to building the relationships that would ensure humanity's security and prosperity among the stars. She never forgot the lesson that the Galactic Council had taught her, that even the mighty could fall, and that the small and overlooked might one day shake the heavens, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, young species on 1,000 worlds watched the broadcast from Earth and took note. They saw what humanity had accomplished against impossible odds, and they learned that the universe was not quite as hopeless as it had seemed. The Council's grip on the galaxy had been loosened, and possibilities that had once seemed like fantasies were now within reach. Because if humans could do it, if a species that had been building pyramids just 5,000 years ago could stand against the masters of the galaxy and win, then perhaps anything was possible.